All right. So the first question that we have for you was do you have any sort of offering to give people to inspire them? And the offering can be like a quote, it can be a story, an anecdote, picture, whatever you want.
Yeah. Um, let me think for just one moment. Um, I guess there's a bit of a story that comes to mind that's directly related to TASN. So the kind of like, yeah, when I, sorry, one second. So my background is pretty rough. I was born to two parents on the alt-right, two white supremacists who are deeply involved in like deep right QAnon organizing. And they were very, very, very abusive to me growing up. And I left home when I was only 12, and I struggled with houselessness and definitely with finding queer community and anarchist community that I can really relate to with that kind of really, really rough background. And part of why I initiated creating TASN in 2019 was because I first met a trans woman who is the same age as me, named Jessica, who was in my area, who was seeking asylum. And despite the trickiness with some of the language barrier, she was the first person that I ever met in the queer community who could really square with my amount of trauma. And we just immediately bonded like with each other because of our ability to talk about our traumas and to talk about our resiliency without being filtered, without being censored. And, we came together to create TASN because she was in a moment of crisis in her life. And I actually was also in a moment of crisis in my life. When we created TASN, it really saved both of us. It gave each of us community. It gave each of us purpose and infrastructure for supporting one another. And it's been such a hard struggle over the years with TASN. Like it's very, very hard work. We've had to learn so much around who do we work with, who do we not work with, how do we navigate conflict and trauma and re-traumatizing each other in the work, and how do we retain people, and how do we coordinate nationally, and how do we have like skills for harm reduction and navigating the legal process and understanding like trauma and codependency and addiction, and also have anarchist politics and also be bringing in $20,000 a month. Like it's a very intense organization to be a part of. And, we've had heartbreak and success over the years. And there was this one night where I was providing 24/7 aftercare to Jessica after she got gender affirmative surgery, where I was just sort of like processing and taking in, like all the intense ups and downs of TASN over the years. Um, this was really only a few months ago, and TASN's going into its fifth year now. So we've had many years of just like being in this work together. And I kind of turned to her at 3 a.m. and I was like, Jessica, like with all this heartbreak, with all this struggle, with all this experimentation, do you feel like TASN has accomplished its goal of providing um, the most comprehensive and the best support for LGBTQ asylum seekers in the country? Do you think we've met that goal? She's the first person seeking asylum to have ever been supported by us. She's been with us for 5 years. She's been with us through all of our struggles and successes as an organization. And she just turned to me in the middle of the night, like covered in all her bandages, and was like, Alla, you have surpassed your goal as an organization. Like you met your goal, you provide the best support available, and you do it autonomously with a solidarity mindset. And it's better than the nonprofits that have supported me. It's better than the religious organizations and the sponsorship situations. And I think that's kind of just like, kind of as a comrade, what I can bring to any space, any offering to give is that no matter what background you come from, no matter what levels of support you do or do not have, what education you do or do not have, if you just wedge yourself to the work and stick with the work and really stay at it, and put your heart in it and be earnest and love deeply, like you can accomplish great things. So
well said.
Yeah, that was great. I was gonna ask like if there was any particular lessons out of that, because there were so many I think that I heard in that are like good offerings. But you gave one at the end there. So I think I'm satisfied.
Yeah,
We got a bunch of
sure.
offerings. Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
The first one that I had here was if you could explain to listeners what TASN is exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And for testimonies, I just want to say that there are lots of people receiving support from TASN who would be down to give a testimony. And we have many pre-written and pre-recorded also. So if you want to splice that in, just let me know.
Wonderful.
Cool. So the Trans Asylum Seekers Support Network, or La Red de Apoyo para Solicitantes de Asilo Trans, is a border abolitionist direct action and mutual aid collective that provides comprehensive long-term support to LGBTQ asylum seekers, primarily trans women, coming from Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Palestine. And we have existed for 5 years now, started in the beginning of 2019. And our goal is to provide the most comprehensive long-term support possible to asylum seekers that are dropped by or unable to be properly supported by all existing dominant forms of asylum support in this country, which includes support from the nonprofit industrial complex, religious organizations, and the sponsorship system. I can explain more about what sponsorship is if you all would like. But a lot of the folks that TASN supports are treated as disposable. They are folks who often are extremely traumatized and prone towards violence, both towards themselves and towards others, physical and emotional violence. They are oftentimes illiterate, uneducated, engaged in sex work. They can, have different disabilities. And they're people that need not to be supported for 3 months or 6 months or a year, but who need comprehensive support for like 5 to 7 years. In addition to providing this comprehensive support, TASN is really invested in helping to build an anarchist, anti-imperialist movement in this country. In addition to providing support to asylum seekers here, we make sure to build deep relationships with radical political organizations on the ground in all of the different countries where our compas are coming from, and really build those sister organizations. We historically built relationships with trans activists in San Salvador, El Salvador, and we raised over $3,000 for them to create their own organization on the ground there called Trans Latinas with 3 S's at the end. And they provided really comprehensive mutual aid for their entire communities in San Salvador during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. We built relationships with organizations helping to lead and organize the strike in Colombia. And Antioquia Diversa is a trans organization that famously, like, there's footage of trans women like voguing and dancing around the cops during the big general strike in Colombia that happened a couple of years ago. Those were our compas, our comrades. We were supporting them legally, financially, emotionally through that. And we've also done campaigns to support the indigenous Garifuna community in Honduras, to support Honduran radicals and queer people during the hurricane in Honduras. We are building relationships with organizations, independent, autonomous, anarchist, and queer organizations in Cuba, in Jamaica, in Belize. And so there's a lot more I can say about what TASN is, but there's a little overview.
Do you feel like, I feel like we got a good got good insights from you already about TASN's origins. Do you feel like there's anything else that you would like to add, or
anything else that I would like to add about TASN's origins? I'm so collectively minded, you know. I'm like used to turning to my comrades and being like, what do you all want to say? So yeah, I guess I can just add that basically in 2018, you know, Donald Trump was spewing xenophobic rhetoric all over the national media. And so in response to that, it became a social justice trend for every liberal and their grandmother to want to get involved in, you know, immigrant rights work at that time. And so what happens with these social justice trends, right, is that they come and they go very intensely and quickly. And so what happened was everybody decided that they wanted to house an asylum seeker in their home. They wanted to become a sponsor for an asylum seeker. And religious organizations and nonprofits were mass recruiting middle-class people with extra rooms in their homes all over the country and not preparing them properly and not vetting them properly. They were like, you've got an extra room, you know, you're pro-immigrant rights, great. We're going to send someone to you, and they should be set in 3 to 6 months, set to be independent. And so basically that obviously generated a national crisis where people seeking asylum, often who were not English speakers, were sent to these middle-class homes with white centrist or liberal families that had no organizing experience, that had no anti-imperialist or solidarity framework, who are totally charity minded, you know, in the middle of Nebraska and Arkansas and wherever, you know. And so you know, people who were particularly vulnerable in these circumstances were often young Black, brown, and Indigenous trans women who would often want to get immediately involved in sex work to help sustain themselves and to send money back to their families when they arrived. And so, yeah, what happened was, like, you know, there was this huge surge in all of these liberals all over the country being like, I'll house you for 3 to 6 months. I'll take a bunch of photos with you, post them on Facebook, talk about what a martyr I am. But once you actually have any needs and you're not ready to be independent 3 months in, I'm going to be kicking you out. And so a lot of people seeking asylum were literally being kicked out from these liberals' homes all over the country. 3 months, it doesn't make any sense. They were being told 3 months. People can't even legally work in 3 months. You know, like, imagine being, TASN has supported people as young as 13 years old. We've supported people as old as in their 40s. But imagine being a 13-year-old trans girl from Honduras who only speaks Spanish, landing in someone's home for 3 months and then being told you have to leave, like in a new country. So it's absurd. So so when I met Jessica, she was in a moment of crisis because she had been placed in a home with a lesbian white couple in Western Mass who had, who were progressive, but who had no organizing experience, and who were like vegetarians and very emotionally sensitive and fragile and didn't want her eating meat in the home and didn't want her playing reggaeton past a certain hour and didn't, wanted her to follow extremely, extremely strict COVID protocol. And it just was a terrible match. And she wasn't getting the support she needed. She wasn't getting the community she needed. They didn't know how to like meet her on a peer-to-peer solidaristic level. And so basically, when I met with her, I was like, why don't we build an organization that tries to experiment with alternative forms of support? And a lot of that has looked like experimenting with different types of living arrangements. So TASSN figured out how, as just a grassroots mutual aid collective, to rent apartments on our own and have like 3 trans women who are all seeking asylum like live together. So we rent like, several apartments, and we've experimented with folks being roommates. That worked a lot better for some folks. For other folks, it was a disaster. And so we've also experimented with like bringing in enough funding so that if folks want to just live alone in a studio or 1-bedroom apartment, they can do that. But that's part of our origins. So
That's awesome.
It's so interesting to me that like established things that are set up for folks, what you were describing about the family in Western Mass versus something that could like spontaneously be created by you and another individual. It already, like, if you were to try to sell me, or like sell me on one idea versus the other, I'm like, right off the bat, your guys' hands down sounds way more attractive to anyone entering a new country than anything that the government could set up, or well-to-do liberals could provide.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that validation.
Mm-hmm.
I think the spirit of it is like organizers in TASN are traumatized, working class, queer people with anarchist politics. So, we would never say to one of our compas, one of our comrades seeking asylum, like, like, don't eat meat in my kitchen, like, yeah.
Very cool.
It seems like that kind of mentality is like the mentality of the nonprofits too, where it's like people are not human beings who are like their own little, well, they're their own ecosystem, very complex. You can't just try to change all this stuff in somebody at a moment, or in this idea. It's like they're not human beings. That's kind of what it is. It seems like that, the whole attitude, especially this idea that like within 3 months that you would have everything together or something. You wouldn't need ongoing care. I mean, everybody needs ongoing care.
Right. What would you say TASN needs from other people? Not just money and purchasing, but connections, knowledge, peer support, offers and needs lists we can share, things like that.
Thank you for this great question. Again, I wish that maybe for next time, I would love to bring more comrades onto the show, because I never like to answer questions as a solo representative of my collective. But what do we need? We need more TASNs to exist right off the bat. Part of the work that we're doing is we're just working so hard to experiment with different forms of organizing ourselves so that we can then share that with comrades in other places so that they can create their own collectives. Because of how long-term our support is, we're supporting about 34 people seeking asylum right now, and we cannot, for years, we haven't been able to bring on more people. We just, there's 16 of us organizing in the collective, and so we want more TASNs to exist. We also want more organizers. TASN is a national collective, and we have local chapters, but we also have people who organize totally remotely, and everybody is equally valuable. You can find an application to join our collective. It sounds funny, but on our Instagram at Trans Asylum Supports, if you click the link in the bio. We are definitely looking for Spanish speakers who are anarchists, and anti-imperialists who are down to build deep and meaningful relationships with our compas seeking asylum, who have experience or want to learn about supporting folks through their legal processes, through getting gender affirmation surgery, through, healthcare, mental health care, EBT, food stamps, English learning, organizing fundraisers, helping to manage our social media, helping us manage our partnerships. We do a lot of the slow and meaningful, but, unglamorous labor on a day-to-day basis. I think, inviting both our organizers and our compas who are receiving support from our collective to come speak on podcasts at university classes, uplifting our work on social media, inviting us to publish things in magazines or zines, becoming a recurring monthly donor, which anyone who becomes a recurring monthly donor gets on our newsletter list, so you get a monthly update of all of our successes for the month. I'm trying to think of what my comrades would say. TASN is totally grassroots, and so we have an average of I think 500 monthly donors giving $10 a month. I always feel like Bernie Sanders when I say that.
That's the first thing I thought.
No, that's not. Bernie Sanders is a whole nother thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're willing to throw in $5, $10 or more dollars a month, God, unfortunately, mutual aid is about money. I know that Dean Spade says beg, steal, and borrow. But you also got to fundraise.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even, it's one thing I've been looking at is how the Black Panthers manage their fundraising and finances. And I'm like, wow, this is just as unglamorous as us,
All this talk about the lack of glamour, it reminds me of something that a trans woman told me who was volunteering in Rojava, and they're like, there's this whole thing about revolutionary work. A lot of people think it's about just picking up a gun and go doing stuff. They're like, the real revolutionary work is boring. It's boring. It's mediocre. It's tedious. It's day to day. I guess we just have to find a way to glamorize boring and mediocrity.
Yeah. Make a movie about it.
But yeah, it's if it's life sustaining, its chances are it's mediocre and boring. And that's beautiful. And cool, in my opinion. One thing, have y'all ever done this? Have y'all ever looked at what you're spending your money on and then see if any of that stuff can like turn that into an ongoing need to see if anybody would be willing to donate for that stuff?
Yeah, we have over our 5 years, we have experimented with many, many different
Cool.
ways of getting money like that. Should I actually talk about our money a little bit? It's kind of interesting how we do
If you
it.
want, yeah, if you want.
Yeah.
So, TASN has experimented with having a fiscal sponsor and not having a fiscal sponsor. For folks who don't know, basically, to receive grants, you often need a 501c3 bank account, which is the bank account that a nonprofit has. TASN is never going to become a nonprofit, despite so much pressure and so much scolding that we become one. But there are a lot of like grassroots, no strings attached grants that we do want to receive. We always like heavily vet where the grants are coming from, make sure they have no strings attached, make sure that they're coming from anti-Zionist nonprofits, etc. But we basically have two bank accounts. We have an LLC bank account that is the Trans Asylum Seeker Support Network. And we have an LLC bank account that is its own separate entity called like the Friends of the Trans Asylum Seeker Support Network. And basically, in our own bank account, we have all of our grassroots donations coming in, and we have complete and utter freedom with that money. Where like in TASN, we need so much freedom with our money. We need to be able to be like, okay, this compa is dealing with this crisis. We need to send $500 right now. Or this compa, like something happened, her car broke down, she needs this money right now. Like we just need like total freedom with our money. So we have our own kind of bank account for that. And then we have this other bank account that is fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit. And we receive all of our grant money. And for like fancy schmancy big deal donors that want to get tax cuts or whatever from donating to us, like if they're giving like 20K or more, then we have them donate there. And the nonprofit does all of the bookkeeping and all of the like tax filing for our grant money and those like big donations. And so it's this like, yeah, this kind of dual bank account system, which will be interesting for anyone who's in a long-term mutual aid organization dealing with huge amounts of money to hear about. It might be boring for everyone else. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think that like it fosters the whole transparency culture, which is the exact opposite of what a lot of these nonprofits are, right? They're just taking your money and doing all sorts of destruction in local communities with lots of makeup on. Yeah, I think okay, so what role does Chicago or Illinois or like any people living in these areas play any role with TASN right now? Um, and whether they do or not, how might things improve?
Okay, Chicago. Oh my God. I just want to say I love Chicago. I have eyed moving to Chicago for so many years. I mean, I think that so TASN currently has chapters in Boston, Austin, Texas, New York City, and Western Mass. At different points, we've had chapters in Miami, Florida, Tucson, Arizona, California at one point, Maine at one point. And our Boston one is going to be dissolving because folks are moving to other areas. I think that you know, Chicago would be an amazing place for folks to build a TASN chapter, or for folks to build an organization similar to TASN that we could refer folks who are seeking our support that we don't have the capacity support to. So yeah, I encourage folks in Chicago to apply or to reach out to us to learn how we operate, to gain inspiration from, or to emulate our work. You know, we like, I know that there's definitely some amazing like anarchist, you know, abolish ICE efforts and collectives on the ground in Chicago. I would encourage them to reach out to us, to build relationships with us. And yeah, you know, also like we have people all over the country and sometimes in other parts of the world throwing punk shows and tattoo raffles and all kinds of things as fundraisers for TASN, and of course an incredible music scene in Chicago, and would invite folks to do that kind of thing too.
Nice. Yeah, so you were saying that it doesn't have to be people creating a whole nother effort. It could come out of an existing effort or existing relationships.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, did you said earlier that a lot of the folks who y'all are walking with are traumatized from violence.
Yeah.
Is any of that ever domestic violence?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Folks are dealing with every form of violence that you can imagine. Folks that we support.
Yeah, because one of the things that I've seen in the US, Turtle Island, from in tenant union organizing, as well as my relationship to helping people who have been dealing with domestic violence, is that people will flee to the other side of the country from domestic violence, or and sometimes landlord violence is also domestic violence, because living in the same building, they have access to your home all the time. It's like almost like they live with you, especially like these stalkery landlords. And so it wouldn't surprise me that people are also having to flee countries to get away from violence in the home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's anyone in our network that is fleeing just domestic violence, but that's definitely a part of the picture often. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna add too that I like what you were adding with regards to TASN and setting stuff up in other cities like Chicago, and you I believe the word you used was emulate. It was okay for other organizations to emulate what you guys are doing, because the implications there, potentially go above and beyond, what tasks. And so it shows the genuineness of the organization, that you guys are okay with people, kind of borrowing from you guys too. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. um Yeah, I mean, I think like there's always interesting balance between trying to strengthen a single national organization versus building another one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that yeah, we're definitely pro decentralization. And TASN is a very, very prefigurative politics organization, and we all of us in the collective recognize that we are practicing the skills that we need with communication, with organizing ourselves, with managing our shared resources that we need in order to live in a world without the state. And we very much all recognize that we're being deeply transformed in that process. We're becoming new people by engaging in self-activity and organization for the benefit of ourselves and the people we love in a way that dissolves our alienation from our own labor. It's very cathartic. And a lot of people come into TASSN really never having had that kind of opportunity for integrity and embodied autonomy before. They come in and they're like, okay, who's going to tell me what to do? Like, so conditioned by school, so conditioned by work, so conditioned by, hierarchical family structures. And so, we see our mission not like as definitely prefigurative, dual power building, but also we want everyone in the movement and everyone in the world to be developing the skills that we're developing, so that in the face of state collapse, ecological collapse, that all people have these skills we're developing.
Oh, by the way, the reason why I asked earlier about the domestic violence situation is because there's a anti-DV collective I'm in, and we've actually been one of our members has been wanting to learn more about essentially the type of work the TASN is doing and how to learn from that and maybe even support. And so I was looking for what might be just like a very natural connection to like to help to get more connected in those spheres. But one thing that I like about what I'm hearing so far today is how I think you've admitted from the beginning, like a lot of the mistakes that have happened or conflicts that have happened, in a way that that I think is pretty genuine. And I feel like that's kind of like that kind of orientation I think that we should have about conflict and mistakes. Especially with this type of work that's very stressful. And the fact that y'all are trying, one of the coolest things I've seen you offer today is kind of like your experience and sharing like your lessons. Even if people are able to share lessons just in failures and being honest, like, hey, this was a failure, I think that's a lot that should motivate people to get involved, because you have like 5 years of mistakes or lessons to learn from that'll help you to not make those mistakes, even though I think sometimes people have good motivations about being afraid to make mistakes, but hopefully a lot of people can get over those fears. But it's a lot easier to get over those fears when you have a support system or a collaborative system that's willing to peer up. So that's an incredible offer that anybody wanting to do this work has. I mean, they all have made, in my opinion. Because like when we try to do this in Chicago, it was experimental too, but we didn't really have anybody to talk to about this stuff at the time. It's pretty difficult. But if we had people who could like ground us and like what to expect, it probably would have been easier. And I'm glad for anybody else who's going to do this work for whom it's going to be easier, because they'll be able to lean on folks like you. I'm sorry, folks in TASS and folks like you.
Well, I'd be definitely down to talk more about some of our mistakes and experimentation over the years if you'd like.
Yeah, if you want, yeah, that it might give people kind of like a good grounding of what to expect. And yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. Sweet. Well, gosh. So let me pick one to begin with. So the one thing that we've had to sort of experiment with over the years is our culture and our culture of sort of intimacy versus professionalism, between organizers and also between organizers and the folks that we're supporting, who we call our compas, which, you know, just means our comrades. And, you know, it's just always a tricky ongoing experiment, because our relationships, for example, between organizers and our compas, are pulling elements of so many different types of relationships that are kind of contradictory with one another. So we're like family, but we're also kind of like have some elements of social worker and client. You know, we're helping people, we're giving people money and resources and access to benefits, you know. We have some elements where we're like comrades and where we're like friends, and we're a lot of elements where we're also like parents. And a lot of folks that come into TASSN, you know, this is the first time that they've been provided shelter and care and love and support, learning like conflict resolution skills. And a lot of times that can look very mentory, very parenty. You know, a lot of times folks will like trauma bond with us. You know, I've had a lot of folks that we're supporting like often tell me I'm like the mom that they never had, or stuff like that. And so, you know, it's been a tender and complex journey to figure out how to have the most nourishing and genuine, but also the most careful, sustainable, and ethical relationships with the folks that we're supporting that we can. When TASSN started, I was so sick of the hyper professionalism and impersonalization that I saw both in the nonprofit world, but also here in Western Mass. Like, certain socialist organizations were very dominant in the radical scene, and they were like, you know, just so impersonal with each other that I kind of reactively like went to the far other end of the spectrum, where I was like, let's be having like when TASN first started, we were like a 24/7 slumber party. I mean, it was just like organizers and our compas spending 24/7 together, you know, partying, slumber partying, fundraising, and it was very, very, very magical. And you know, it was like a bunch of young, traumatized, codependent, queer people doing the magical abolitionist work, all high on feeling our power of being able to like get people out of detention. And obviously, in our lifetime, that crashed and burned, that model. And we had some healing crises. We had an organizer and someone that we were supporting, a compa, fall in love with each other, and that was a whole, you know, intense, painful thing to navigate. And so now I feel like we've really hit this like beautiful balance in our 5th year, like across our whole collective, with like our collective ownership, our collective processes, decision-making processes, resource management, structure, our recruitment, our vetting, our orienting people, our boundaries, and our intimacy with the folks we're supporting. Like everything is just chef's kiss, like just functioning so healthily and so well. And which is why I feel like we have anything to offer, you know, like I'm like, okay, you know. But I think that like, you know, one lesson that I would really share with other people is from the get-go to recognize the power dynamic between organizers and folks that you're supporting in mutual aid projects, especially, I mean, there's so many power dynamics, but especially when folks are, immigrating here, it's like we've had many organizers who's, are children of immigrants who have narrated like how traumatizing it was to watch their mom like come to this country, feel pushed into a relationship with a citizen that was not healthy, not and very exploitative, just for survival. And so in TASSN, we really value just like being very ethically careful around just the power that we have in terms of providing shelter, providing money, providing all benefits, and like to sorry, I'm getting a bit rambly here, but to enjoy moments of closeness and friendship with our compas that are in like the context of community events and community parties and local chapter meetings and political education and dinners, and to really have a system where when people graduate from your organization, then after that graduation, there can be dialogue and spaciousness around shifting dynamics. Like I've had several folks in TASSN that were supporting like fall in love with me. And kind of how I've navigated that with the support of my comrades is being like, listen, at this time with this power dynamic, I do not feel comfortable, and our collective doesn't feel comfortable with us having a romantic relationship. But if in 5 years from now you graduate, you're making your own money, you're living on your own, you're thriving, and like we're both still interested, then we can like more so meet as equals. So there's one lesson. I'll pause there because I mean there's obviously so many more lessons I could talk about. But yeah.
Thanks for giving that one.
Yeah.
I feel like there's probably a lot of people who needed to hear that one off the bat. And I'm guessing that these were complex situations that happened that y'all didn't quite know how to relate to at the beginning, but now you have this experience and you can confidently say, that's probably not the way to do it. We should probably do this.
Yeah. And I think it helps having survivors in the collective. Like me, I was homeless most of my life. So I know what it's like when someone is just like in a position where they can provide support for you, and how easy it is to fall in love with them, when you're in that position. And, our organizers who were, either immigrants themselves or kids of immigrants also really understood that. So I think, yeah, I think the hardest part was that when these situations came up, it showed us our differences amongst the collective, where some of us were like right off the bat, like, nope, that's not ethical. That's such a clear boundary to hold. Whereas other folks were like, I think, just overwhelmed with the admiration and googly-eyedness that people who need you and look up to you and are receiving support from you can just project onto you. And so now, like 5 years in, like in our interviewing process for people joining our collective, I can talk about that. It's very intensive. We vet people very deeply. And that's, a form of affinity that we look for, is like, can we trust you to hold those kinds of ethical boundaries?
Yeah, that actually that would be a good segue to our next question, because was how should someone prepare themselves to get involved in TASN? And then kind of a follow-up to that question is, should they check in with TASN while they're preparing?
I love that question. Thank you. So okay, let's see. Yet again, a question that I would love to ask my whole collective, and I'll probably bring some of these questions that y'all are asking back to my collective because they're great reflections for us.
Please do.
So TASN is a place where people can really become very developed holistically as organizers. Like anyone that joins TASN and is with us for a couple of years is going to have the skills needed to leave and then go create their own mutual aid organization that does high stakes work from scratch. It's a, very developmentally intensive organization. So sometimes it works as people's first mutual aid organization, but oftentimes it is better as a second or a third one to be a part of. Because when you don't have awareness of like your tendencies towards flakiness or how to gauge your own capacity, you're impacting people's life or death as opposed to impacting like people getting mac and cheese at Food Not Bombs or not, So it's nice to have some, like what I would say to people is, get some practice in other organizations, unionizing your workplace or running campaigns, doing some other things before you join us. I would say get really fluent and comfortable with signal communication. Because TASN is a national collective, we even have some members in Canada, actually, that are a part of our core. We do a lot of coordinating on signal. So experience signal. And then I would say learn Spanish and engage in political education. Understand anarchist perspectives on US imperialism throughout Central and Latin America and the Caribbean, and understand anarchist history and anarchist values. And I would say, develop an appreciation for TASN's specific role. I think a lot of people join TASN because of the fetishization of the identities of the folks we're supporting, right? Like trans women of color are like treated like unicorns on the left or something. And so they join and they're like, I want to be a good person and help trans women of color. And I'm like, join TASN because you're passionate about international poor and working class solidarity. Join TASN because you understand that over the next 50 years, people in the United States need to be prepared to welcome massive amounts of climate change refugees and need to have the infrastructure to bring them here and support them. Join TASN because you believe in the anarchist theories of change that our collective is committed to, such as prefigurative politics, dual power, building infrastructure in the face of ecological and state collapse, the ways that we engage in direct actions against ICE and detention centers, and, the international solidarity work we do.
So, I like how you mentioned like y'all have a sense of futurity, like what's coming. So on that point, is there any type what other well you already kind of mentioned this, but you can go deeper into it, or is there any other type of prefigurative activity that you think anarchists should be doing? What should we be creating in our localities or across localities?
I love that.
Yeah, in addition to more TASNs.
In addition to more TASNs. Cute. Yeah, well, gosh. For me, anarchism is a political understanding that means we're committed to building a world where production, consumption, education, healthcare, sanitation, entertainment, literature, are all collectively managed, horizontally managed by federations, trade unions, cooperatives, affinity groups, assemblies, general assemblies, territorial affinity groups of all kinds, right? And so, you know, I don't know what the future holds, right? I don't know what possibilities there are for, you know, insurrectionary and revolutionary power internationally and in this country to proactively cause capitalist and state collapse versus the time, you know, that timeline versus like just ecological collapse, the rise of fascism, all of this. But I would say just such a deep encouragement for anarchists to develop the skills needed for that kind of vision, to talk to their neighbors, to talk to their communities, to get good at bringing people into the movement, to find your people, build slowly, keep at it, and, you know, to also, of course, think internationally. I always like to say my motto is like, if we want to abolish borders, we need to be building relationships as if borders already don't exist. So learn Spanish, get to know people below the border and above the border. And I mean, I just think that there's such an overwhelming tendency in this country for anarchism to be so subcultural, so individualistic. I often see a sort of subcultural tendency where people sort of can't compete for how anti-organizational they can be. Like, you know, you're laughing over there, just like,
Yeah.
you know, it's, I actually don't think it's something to brag about that your organization doesn't check your email. You know, I'm like, you know, just here, I'm kind of all over the place emotionally, but prefigurative, yeah. I mean, of course, I do have to come back to building more TASNs, though, just because we're just going to be seeing such an influx of climate change refugees coming to this country, and also of people fleeing just because the United States, Europe, and Israel have stolen all of their land's resources. You know, people are forced to flee where their resources are stolen and then taken to. Yeah, let me think if there's anything else I want to add.
I appreciate you bringing that stuff up because honestly, I mean, I feel like even you know, in more libertarian circles, I don't hear it enough. Climate kind of gets, you know, but yeah, and then the fact that there's the estimated amounts of climate refugees that are going to be making their way up, you know, and the fact that you guys are preparing, you know, you're big on preparing individuals to welcome and and sustain that influx of, yeah, huge.
Thank you for naming the importance of that. Yeah, I think maybe the final thing I'll just add is that you know, people always ask me, how has TASN lasted for 5 years? Like, so many other mutual aid organizations have dissolved, often due to conflict, other reasons that kind of started before or at the beginning of the pandemic. And my answer to that is always kindness. kindness. We're really, really good at being super kind with each other and super forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, we have practices culturally and officially that really combat insularity and combat cultishness. I mean, I want to be like, for example, when new people join our organization, we're eager for their critique, we're eager for their fresh eyes on the organization, and we don't just say to people, you must assimilate into our way of doing things and our culture and our way of being. I would encourage people to do their healing work. I mean, a lot of people in TASN are in like Codependence Anonymous. They're in therapy. They're really like, they have their spiritual practices, their meditation and mindfulness practices. They're doing like DBT work. They're working on their complex PTSD. I think that that's been the magic of TASN, is that we're always in TASN talking about boundaries and mindfulness and codependency and compassion and the amount of experimenting we're able to do and resiliency that we're able to have because we're just so sweet with each other is what has made us last. And that includes like being like warm and emotionally attuned to each other and like really taking care of each other. And there's often a critique of anarchism that subculturally it's very aloof, it's very cold, it's very unwelcoming. And we strive to be the opposite of all of those things. So yeah.
Yeah, it's that old saying, what attract more bees with honey, right?
Ooh, I like that.
Like
Attract more bees without colts.
without calls. That's our addition.
But yeah, no, those are real tendencies. Uh, and uh I've seen them around. Um, so I'm glad that y'all are going the opposite direction. Another one of the interesting things that I see though, sorry, back to prefigurative politics. I think one of the things I was picking up about what you're getting into is that like prefigurative politics, it does require being grounded in the presence and like knowing the basics and starting small too. That's one of the things that I see among a lot of anarchists too, is sometimes people will be thinking like really big at really big levels. But there's like some basics that they just totally ignore, like the value of knowing who you're organizing with. Like, dude, we should be talking to our neighbors, and people want to like coordinate big old orgs and stuff. Like sometimes very like hierarchical status mindset, in my opinion, when people get into this thing, like just thinking about how to run stuff from above. And then about a lot of value is just not, and if focus is not placed in the present on doing just the basic stuff before a lot of that stuff can really even be meaningfully considered. And I think that's part of like sometimes the failure of a lot of anarchist groups too, is they kind of want to go very big very fast, but you have to build that stuff, in my opinion, from starting really small. And y'all are in a fortunate position where you're able to be thinking about that stuff. Well, you have to think about that stuff too, and you've figured out a way to continue to survive. 5 years is a long time, um, for a lot of, at least in the realm of anarchists too, because yeah, I've seen things come and go, really brave, big things come and go. And sometimes they had to. Other times it would have been nice if they would have stayed around. I think people did want it to survive, but they just, it became very oppressive within. Um, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much I can say about both those things. You just tell me when to stop talking.
So I'm currently in the process of bringing a pro LGBTQIA plus group into my local Catholic parish. And I have been lucky that I found some allies, individuals who want to remain or continue to identify as Catholic, but obviously disagree with certain practices, certain treatment of LGBTQIA plus folks within the church. So I was able to find individuals who are like-minded in that way. But a question I had for you is, what can churches and organizers working within these spaces do to support the trans community and and then the broader LGBTQIA plus community?
Okay, sweet. So you're sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about folks supporting LGBTQ asylum seekers?
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you wanted to speak specifically to that, but if there's anything else that comes to mind, I know you've said that you rambled. I don't think you ramble. I think you stay on point. You bring up other, good things along with the answer. So feel free. Yeah. Yeah. If you want to focus specifically on the asylum seekers, that'd be great.
Cool.
But if
Okay.
there's anything else you wanted to add to that on that same topic, feel free.
Sure. Okay. So you're asking, so there's this church and they're wanting to just bring in LGBTQ orgs and be in solidarity with them and support them. What do they need to know? What should they be doing?
Yeah, and individuals like myself and other people working within these religious spaces,
Yeah.
what can we continue to do, or what should we be doing to efficiently support organizations like yours and like others.
Yeah. Well, um, I think having progressive and radical LGBTQ friendly religious spaces is
Mm-hmm.
huge, huge. I mean, a lot of queer and trans folks seeking asylum, as well as working class queer and trans folks I know, really seek religious churches and spaces and, can't find them. And so I think like, um, you know, uh, having pastors and people speaking during church at sermons. Sorry, I'm Jewish, so I'm not totally familiar with how
No,
church works.
that's fine. Yeah.
But I think is really, really, really important. And I think having an understanding within churches and parishes that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew anarchist, and really being inspired by Jesus's like heart first, love first kind of revolutionary strategy, is a great place to start. I mean, I'm certainly inspired by that.
Right.
And yeah, I think what can churches do? I'm thinking about my churches locally. Um, I mean, I guess I would say follow the leadership of anarchists, the leadership of anarchists, people who really understand what it's like to move through support work in a solidarity, not charity mindset. I think some of our struggles collaborating with churches historically have been that, like, no matter how progressive or well-meaning they are, they fall into charity ways of relating and just liberal ways of relating. And so I think like doing political education within churches around, you know, anti-imperialism is huge. And, you know, like having a critical understanding of Christian and Catholic colonialism would be great in those spaces.
I agree.
Yeah. You know, and I would say like my dream relationship to have with churches, like with TASN, for example, would be like do regular fundraisers for us and just bring in a regular stream of money for us, and develop a list of resources that you can provide us, such as like organize a ride share for TASN, organize a local ride share, have all your people offer that, like they can be a part of a group chat. So if any asylum seekers in our org need rides to appointments or check-ins or work, that y'all can give rides. I would say like, you know, offering people emergency and crisis housing. Like, you know, what material things can your community provide to poor and working class people who might be engaged in sex work and, you know, might be getting kicked out of their homes, might be struggling with food security. And yeah, I mean, I guess those are some things that come to mind.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, you put a good quote in there. I like the solidarity, not charity. That's good. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
So I have a question about this. I don't really know those type of demographics because I don't live around them. But let's say that there are some people who like they're just so steeped into like American liberalism, American contemporary liberalism, and the solidarity, I'm sorry, charity, not solidarity, sensibilities and practices. Are there ways that where they can like be honest about their limits that you know that they can't shake that anytime soon? Are there ways where people who can't shake those sensibilities soon can still be involved in some degree in helping out? Do you think while they're figuring that, while they're figuring that out?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And I can speak directly to how we mobilize those demographics for TASN if you'd like. So basically with TASN, we have multiple levels of membership to our organization. We have our internal collective, which is our core organizers. There's like 16 of us, and our compas who we're supporting. And then we have what we call our broader network. We also have local chapter meetings. Okay, so there's like broader network, local chapter meetings, and then our internal collective is the 3 levels of our organization. If people want to be a part of TASN, but their politics are too liberal for them to join our collective, then we have them agree to a certain set of values and political principles to be able to join what we call our broader network. Our broader network is like 400 people, as opposed to our internal collective, which is 16. But basically, people have to agree to sort of read our values about what solidarity, not charity means, about anti-imperialism, about, you know, supporting sex workers, about trans liberation, about land back, about pro-Palestine. You know, we have all of our politics on paper for them to read, and then we have all of our values around like always asking for consent to touch people, to take photos of people, to, you know, not ask people about their genitalia, you know, whatever liberals are doing these days. We got it on paper. And so basically, once folks agree to that, we have them join our newsletter. We have them join our like 400-person signal group for our broader network. And we delegate tasks to them that our tiny little collective can't hold. So we're like, hey, can someone give this compa a ride to her court date? Can someone give this compa a ride to the doctor's office? You know, could someone, this compa is sick, could someone go grocery shopping for her? Like, we have like hundreds of different specific tasks that we're able to delegate to our sort of broader network of folks who don't necessarily have enough political affinity with us to like really hold down our project.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry about the WhatsApp beeping there. I just turned that off.
Oh, it's all cool.
What motivates you and others to stay involved in TASN?
Woohoo! Okay. Others, me. Wow. I mean, I'm sure every collective member has their own meaningful speech that they can give. A comrade of mine in the collective who's been a part of TASN for maybe like 4 or 5 months now, his name's Marrow. He was just telling me that he is like stays in TASN because he feels so supported and he feels like it's such a healthy relational organizing space. So I think, you know, a lot of people stay in TASN because they want to be doing meaningful work, and then they find a place where people are really kind, warm, supportive, and like have good boundaries. They're like, hell yeah, I'm staying here. But you know, I think gosh, I stay in TASN as a means to being able to live in this world. You know, it's like every day I wake up and spiritually and physically and emotionally, I confront a world with unspeakable amounts of psychopathic violence. You know, I grew up on the alt-right. I got to see a lot of that violence just as a toddler firsthand, like brutal violence and psychopathy. And so for me, TASN is my vehicle, my refuge in life. You know, being able to be militantly committed, like on the worst of days where I'm lacking in revolutionary. I know some people don't like the word revolutionary anymore. In, you know, in radical or anarchist hope, on those days, at my very best, I'm militantly committed to the survival of people that I love, who have been, you know, whose lives have been completely upended by imperialist violence. And on the best of days, when I'm feeling a lot of hope, I'm a part of a project that is a huge, successful, long-term attempt at building radical infrastructure and dual power. And so, you know, TASN's really able to sort of move with me and where my heart is at and provide so much. And you know, it's my political home. Part of why I'm in it is because it's completely transformed me. You know, I've grown so much because of the organization. So it's saved my life in that way too. It's given me everything really. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want people that I love to die. I guess that's why I'm in it and stay in it. You know, I think more than half of the compas in TASN right now, so about 17 people that I can think of have all narrated it to me that they would not be alive if it weren't for TASN, that TASN saved their lives. And so, you know, why wouldn't you be a part of it? I don't know.
It's a great answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
But yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that's in philosophy, anything, disability justice, hobbies? Like, yeah, do you have a hobby?
Oh,
Stuff like that.
I mean, I could obviously talk to y'all for a whole nother hour. I would love to speak about more about how we combat cultishness in TASN and how I've definitely had some hard learning lessons where I've seen cults form both in anarchist and communist spaces, and like the lessons I took from that, the lessons my other comrades who've experienced those phenomenons have took from that, and how we feel like as a collective it's actually a proactive process, that almost like becoming culty is almost like inevitable, and you have to always be proactively dismantling that and fighting against that. I would, love to talk about our vetting and onboarding and orientation process. I think it's one of our strengths right now is that we have such a comprehensive one, and it leads to such a high retention rate because of that. Would love to talk about spirituality. I mean, I'm pretty deep into Zen Buddhism. But I think most of all, I feel like, should we pick up? Should we do a part 2?
Jeff, what do you think about this? Talk about the Zen Buddhism, and then we'll get into just like how to connect, how people can follow up and connect with y'all. And then that'll be the other parts will be part of part 2.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
All right.
Well, my Zen Buddhism connects to organizing, so it's not totally random. So maybe what you were hoping. But I would just say, throughout my life, I've had a lot of spontaneous mystical experiences, and I really like a very, very bare bones spirituality. I really like, don't believe your thoughts, don't identify with your ego and your body and your name and your memories, and root your identity in the ineffable, the inexpressible, and the divine. And what's so beautiful about having such a disidentification with my thoughts and with my feelings and more of a witnessing of them is that it has allowed me as the founder of this organization to rescind control to the collective, and to really just like let go and allow people to do tasks, do them worse or not as well as I would do them, and then get better at them, and to like patiently wait. You're laughing. Just like, I have to say, like, comradeships are intense relationships because they're like, in some ways I've almost felt affinity to like Silicon Valley startup bros that are talking about the impact that trying to start a business has on their friendships with each other. Where I'm like, yes, take a friendship and then add a ton of stress and responsibility and high stakes situations on top of that friendship, and you get a comradeship. And a lot of practices around like curiosity and when you start to reactively generate stories about what someone meant when they said that, or what someone thinks about you, or what someone thinks about, like whether someone cares about you or not, or cares about your safety or not, having the spiritual and mental internal spaciousness to not believe all the compulsive thoughts and stories that the mind generates, and to be able to instead vulnerably go to a comrade and be like, hey, I'm telling myself a story that you don't care about my safety because of this, this, and that. can you provide me reassurance that you actually do care about my safety? Like that's, just as valuable as understanding, or maybe even more valuable than understanding, like, anarchist perspectives on anti-imperialism. So
Yeah, Zen Buddhism's good. There's yeah. There's a big, I don't know if there's in the Catholic tradition, there's a lot of individuals who have found I think there was a theologian who termed it double belonging. I don't know if all the individuals who associate, within the tradition, the Catholic tradition, who kind of explored Zen Buddhism, I don't know if they all would identify as double belonging, but it's definitely something that the spiritual practices, a lot of people found it very helpful. So yeah, that's good. And I like what you had to say about disconnecting from, or the way you talk about the mental kind of roller coaster that people do, how it's your brain telling you a story. So when you went and spoke with the individual, you said, I'm telling myself a story about how such and such and
right.
yeah, there's a lot of clarity there.
So does the double belonging, does that mean that those Christians, they practice Christianity and Buddhism
Yeah,
at the
it's
same
basically,
time?
yeah, it's finding spiritual nourishment from two different uh faith traditions. Yeah. So I think with a lot of Catholics who are open to that sort of thing and don't feel guilty about practicing two different faiths, I think they'd find that Zen. I mean, I myself, I try to follow some uh, or look into studies on Buddhism because I think there's a lot of real beneficial things there. But yeah, it's basically just trying to obtain spiritual nourishment from two different faith traditions. And I don't see any reason why there couldn't be, triple belonging, quadruple belonging. But yeah, yeah. I think it was Paul. I could be wrong about this, but I think Paul I think the last name's Knitter, Knitter. I think he was a theologian who was big on that. Yeah.
So you're not against poly, Jeff? Poly
What's it?
belonging? You're not
Oh
against
no,
poly belonging?
you got to draw the line at four. You got four is the maximum.
um Alla, when you were talking about this at the beginning, I was like, wow, it just reminded me of how, like, I stopped reading a lot of how do you say, like, a lot of anarchist texts. I stopped reading them a long time ago. I mostly just kind of talk to my neighbors and read other, like, boring stuff outside of anarchist spheres a lot of times. But from a lot of the stuff that I read, a lot of anarchism was like in such revolt against religion and almost like spirituality too, to where it seemed like some of the stuff you're talking about, like, I think a lot of anarchists at some point would have been uncomfortable with some of these ideas, because it was all about, like, the affirmation of the self. But then as you talked about it, um, like how you practically apply it, it is affirmation of the self as well. The way that you use some of that, uh, or the way you relate to the spirituality. Um, do you feel uh do you feel that a lot of the people you come across in movement spaces or wherever do not have an opportunity to have those types of practices? um I've been wondering to what extent having that time to yourself to reflect really is subversive, Because I know that one of the things that I do is I really try to have time by myself to basically kind of like analyze a lot of my bullshit, um, including like those conversations you have in your head or that I have in my head. Um, and I feel like that's really important for me. Like there's some times where I'm like, I don't like people knowing where I'm gonna be because I don't want to get pulled out of that opportunity for me to think about myself and like any potential whack things that um I might be thinking that I need to like correct and be like, yeah, you need to process this. That's not right. You know, you're assuming some things that you don't need to be assuming, you know. Just a thought. Yeah.
So the question is, do I feel like anarchists are really taking time for self-reflective practices?
Yeah, like but just based on what you can see. Of course they can be doing and you wouldn't know it.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm not really in many exclusively anarchist spaces. I mean, I guess TASN is, anarchist in that we're horizontal and consensus, and we ask people to hold those perspectives on anti-imperialism because we want to have, we're supporting people coming from like Cuba and Venezuela and stuff. And so people have to be like critical in that way. But I'm trying to think of like punk houses or exclusively anarchist spaces I've been in. Um, um, those practices. I mean, I guess, you know, I don't totally know how to answer that because I'm not in exclusively anarchist spaces, but I mean, I feel like kind of in some ways, I feel like I see the opposite, where in like a lot of radical liberal spaces, or there continues to be a huge tendency towards, um, replacing political practice with self-care exclusively. A lot of the pleasure activism kind of stuff. You see people, it's kind of similar to privilege politics that came out of the academy, right? Where it's like the extent of my political practice is individual acts. And I feel like I see that really strongly within, you know, quote unquote radical spaces, queer spaces still, is that people have actually lost like an anarchist analysis, a materialist analysis, and they're like, my bubble bath this weekend is the revolution. So I feel like, yeah, so I feel like, for those of us that are drawn more towards like who are survivors, who want to do work to help other people survive, we have to remember to have holistic lives, right? We have to remember that we have to have friends outside of our political organization. We need to have identities and passions and hobbies outside of our political organizing, and they can't just be other political orgs. And have ways of turning off our technology, turning off our minds, being in nature, enjoying music, enjoying food, enjoying physical activities, if that's, within the realms of things you can engage with. And I think that prevents a lot of like cultishness and insularity in groups too, is like when people really, and that's part of the sustainability of it, right? Is like to take care of every domain of your life. To not let one or the other dominate. So I can say that in my own experience, I think that the divide between poor survivors who militantly throw themselves into political work to try and support other poor survivors, tend to be worn out, undercared for, struggling. And then I see a lot of like academic leftists and fragile queer people who really replace political practice with a book deal or writing an article with a radical name or with just a ton of self-care. Like oftentimes, a lot of like, uh, middle-class white queer people will feel like self-care is the end all and be all of their politics because they have like one marginalized identity, right? And so I think like one of the things I often work on is trying to bridge the gap between people who identify as radical or queer or abolitionist who don't do political organizing because it's too uncomfortable for them, it's too hard for them, it's too vulnerable for them, they're too fragile, they're too intellectual, and so the imperfect reality of organizing is too hard for them to grasp with. And I try, because I'm in an area where, I mean, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Western Massachusetts, but you know, there aren't, it's not a big organizing scene out here, but it's a huge like queer scene and university scene. That's part of why TASN had to become national, was because we couldn't even get enough people in Western Mass. But I would say like, yeah, just encouraging those folks to donate, to give their money to organizers, to help us out when we're struggling financially or with our health. And, if they don't want to organize, at least support the people who are organizing in material and financial ways.
How can people connect to TASN if they, for whatever way they want to get in connected?
Well, yeah. Well, end it here quickly then. So you can get connected to TASN by going to our Instagram, which is at Trans Asylum Support, and following us. And if you click the link in our bio, you can join our newsletter, or you can become a recurring monthly donor, and that will automatically get you added to our newsletter. And you can apply to join our collective. Or if you live in Western Mass, Boston, New York City, Austin, Texas, Tucson, Arizona, Miami, Florida, you can also help in person. And so feel free to get in touch with us over our form, or joining our newsletter and then emailing us, or just emailing us directly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks so much for doing this. I really hope that this is gonna help TASN out. I suspect that there's gonna be some new connections as a result of it.
Yeah, we should definitely connect for another one.
Cool.
Lots of good stuff to talk about.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. It's Tuesday. I hope you get to rest your eyeballs and
Yeah.
have a good evening. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Have a good one.